If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. Long distance drivers, what are some of your spookiest/unexplained stories of the road? I was driving a shortcut from 29 Palms, California to Albuquerque, New Mexico. 29 Palms is located in the desolate high desert east of LA. The shortcut was all two-lane road through total nothingness, except for passing through Amboy, California. Amboy is a nearly abandoned town nearly as far below sea level as Death Valley, with a dormant volcano and lava field on one side and a salt flat on the other. It was also, at the time, a hotspot for satanic group activity. So I was driving by myself in the afternoon. I stopped in Amboy and snapped a picture of the city sign, just to prove I was there to friends who dared me to take that route to I-40. I got back in my car and proceeded to drive up into the mountain range between Amboy and I-40. Once I reached the top, I am driving north through a canyon with high grass on both sides of the road. Up ahead I see some stuff in the middle of the road. As I approach, I slow down to see a red Pontiac Fiero stopped sideways across both lanes, a suitcase open with clothes scattered everywhere and two bodies laying face down in the road, a man and a woman. I stop 100 feet or so away and the hair on the back of my neck is standing up. Being a Marine, I reach under the seat and pull out a 9mm pistol and chamber a round. Something seemed very wrong, it looked too perfect, as if it were staged. An ambush? Was I being paranoid? Something was just wrong. Getting out of the car seemed unthinkable, it was the horror movie move. As I scanned the road, I saw a line I could drive. Past the guy in the road on his left, swerve to the right side of the woman, behind the Fiero, and I'd be on the other side. I dropped it into first gear, punched it and drove the line I planned. I passed the back of the Fiero without hitting it or either of the bodies in the road. I continued forward a couple hundred feet and slowed down so I could breathe and let my heart slow down. As I looked up into the rearview mirror, I saw that the two bodies had gotten up to their knees and 20 or so people emerged from the tall grass on either side of the road by the car and bodies. At that moment my right foot smashed the gas pedal to the floor and did not let up until I had to slow down for the I-40 East on-ramp. I will never know what would have happened to me had I gotten out of the car to check on the bodies or stopped my car closer to them. Somehow I do not think it would have been good. Sometimes real life can be scarier than a movie. I was asleep in the passenger seat on a 9-hour trip home to a small town in northern Ontario. I woke up to my boyfriend yelling at me to wake up. I shot upright and see a homeless man dressed in rags, kinda ghostly looking, running down the middle of the road ahead of us. I was so confused and scared. We're in the middle of nowhere, there's no homeless people who live up here, and it's like 1 a.m. It just didn't make sense. Then my eyes focused and I realized I was staring at the ass end of a moose. Not something you want to see on the road at night, but much less scary than homeless crazy ghost guy. I was the passenger for this, but on a long drive I accompanied my mom on. We saw a man standing on the concrete divider at about 10 p.m. It was fall, so it was dark out and pouring rain. He was dressed as a jester, and it was on a stretch of poorly lit highway. She flinched and asked if I saw it. I said that I did, and we watched as he walked slowly along the divider with his arms out a little to the sides. She pulled over because she was freaking out so bad, and he started doing weird stuff, cartwheels and handstands and shit. Weirdest thing ever. One Sunday afternoon, I was jogging along a quiet country road, and it was starting to snow. A Ford Bronco pulling a horse trailer slows down next to me, and the driver asks, "Are you cold?" I say no, because even though I'm cold, you should never show weakness to a stranger. He smiles, and craned his head to look at his horse trailer, then yells, "See, quit complaining." In the horse trailer was the rest of his family, wife, and 4 kids, all dressed nicely like they had just come from church. Upon being chided to quit complaining, 3 of them stick their tongues out at him, and 1 starts crying. The seats in the car were all empty, and to this day I wonder what the backstory was behind that horse trailer incident. Around 95 to 97, I was driving to Michigan to visit family. I live in Kentucky. I normally like to drive on long distance trips like that during the midnight hours because there's less traffic, passengers usually sleep, which makes for longer hauls in between stops, and quite frankly I don't like dealing with other people/drivers. There was one big stretch of road going up through Ohio, or maybe Indiana, can't exactly remember, that was going fine and nothing out of the ordinary. I then start noticing a bright light up ahead. I wasn't sure if it was another vehicle or a gas station, but I thought it seemed a lot brighter than usual. As I kept driving, I could tell it was moving and was getting bigger and bigger. I wake my cousin and tell him to check it out. We're both staring as it is clearly moving closer and becoming more brighter and more larger with every passing second. Then suddenly it seemed as if it instantaneously just flew directly over heads and felt as if it was only a few feet above the car. It never made a sound but was moving ridiculously fast, and for lack of a better description was just like a bright white ball of fire. I watched it move out of the distance through my rearview mirror. Hands down craziest thing I ever saw in my life. Just a couple of months ago I worked a pretty late shift one night. Left the office around 2 a.m. and have a 30 minutes drive home. I live pretty far out in the woodland areas of the country. Forest directly on both sides of the road. I was casually driving along through the fog, and out of nowhere a kid's rubber ball, the basketball-sized ones with cartoons on them, comes bouncing out in the middle of the road from the trees. I slammed on my brakes and swerved to miss because I thought for sure a kid was bound to be chasing behind it. Never seen a soul step out. As I drive on by and started thinking, what would a kid be doing out playing this late? Then I remembered, there were no houses around where this happened at. Someone had to have thrown it in the road. The height it came onto the road at and the way it bounced, the wind simply didn't blow it in front of me. It was pretty creepy. On my way home from a rather long trip with my mother, we got to a bridge where we saw an elderly woman in a white nightgown. Think Grandma Death / Roberta Sparrow from Donnie Darko. It was fall, so rather cool, and the sun was already setting behind the trees, so the white nightgown really showed in the dark. She was just walking. Problem was that she was barefoot and completely clean. Like, nothing had touched her at all. We had been on this road before the bridge for at least 10 miles, and we had another 15 before we got to anything that even resembled civilization. It's the road and ample trees for miles and miles around. We stopped and asked her where she was going and if she was with anyone. Kept mumbling to herself, but I remember her eyes. Her eyes were wide as if she had just seen something frightening. The whites of her eyes were bleached white and the pupil was straight jet black. She never made eye contact with us, and just kept walking forward. We drove off and called the police. We both kept expecting her car or someone to be on the road ahead, but there was no one at all. Stuff like that doesn't happen at all there, so it was pretty startling to say the least. Very plausible that it was dementia or something along those lines. But once more, walking on foot so many miles deep on this road is just unheard of. If anything, that scared us more. I was once driving late night from San Antonio to Houston down I-10, probably about midnight. Along this road there is an access road that runs mostly parallel to the interstate, and veers off at an overpass every now and then. When the road veers off, the overpass, which is usually tall enough to let the tractor trailers through, has a pretty steep incline of dirt and concrete forming the hill. You know what I'm talking about. Anyway, I'm driving down the road sort of caravanning with my friend, except he was about 10 miles back because he stopped at Buc-ee's to get gas, so he was far behind me. I notice there is a car driving at the same speed as me on the access road, veering off at every overpass until I can't see him anymore, and then speeding back up and driving alongside me again and again. At first, I am sort of worried because I think it's a cop. I had a gram with me but hadn't gotten a chance to smoke yet. At one point, the car once again veers off and then back parallel with me until he just takes off, going well over 100 miles per hour, I'm sure, because I was already going around 75 to 80 miles per hour. An overpass was coming and I expected him to veer off again, except he didn't. He just drove straight on and ramped off the overpass, catching what looked like 15 to 20 feet of air, not to mention the height of the overpass already. I was still behind him, so I lost sight of him on the other side because I hadn't passed under the overpass yet. But, when I did pass under, I didn't see anything. Nothing at all. No wreckage, no fire, no trees, bushes, ditches, nothing. It was like it hadn't happened. I pulled off and turned around and looked around the area and I couldn't find any evidence. Weirdest thing I ever saw. But the weirder part is my friend told me he saw the same car doing the same thing when he got to that stretch of the road, only he never saw the car commit suicide like I did. I was driving cross country on my way home to Maine. I'd had enough interstate driving and decided to take back roads the rest of the way home when I got to New Hampshire. So I'm way out in the boondocks past the White Mountains when I see the most effed up and hilarious thing of my whole life. Up ahead was a small human on a shitty old tricycle, weaving back and forth on the road. I slowed down as to not hit them, and as I went by at a crawl I had to rubberneck several times. It was what appeared to be a midget, had a beard, was dressed like an elf in medieval type clothes and a pointy hat. He was wearing dark glasses and was tapping along the road with a long wooden stick. So yeah, it was apparently a blind gnome on a tricycle. I'd been driving all day but didn't feel tired at all. I think it was just some midget with an awesome sense of humor out fucking with people. Or maybe he was crazy, I don't know. Back in the early/mid 1970s my mother and I lived in the Pacific Northwest. I was about 6 years old. We were on an offbeat road right out of Seattle, very dark night, no moon and a wisp of fog. We saw a Volkswagen Beetle on the side of the road with their emergency flashers on and a rather good-looking guy, as my mom describes him, with his arm in a sling waving us down. My mom pulled over, being the kind of woman that would help anybody in need, and he looked normal. Mom rolled down her window and asked if she could help, and the guy asked my mom if she could help him get the last lug nut off his tire so he could change his flat. So my mother introduces herself and he said, "Hello, my name is Ted," and then smiled, then looked at me, reached over and shook my hand and asked my name, and I think I got the bad vibe as well because I said nothing to him. My mom said something about his smile really made her uncomfortable, and then she noticed that he was missing the passenger seat in his Beetle. So she rolls the window back up and said she would call a tow truck to come help him at the next city. Then speeds away. While looking in her rear view mirror, she sees him taking off the sling and getting back in the Beetle, and took off very fast in the opposite direction. So that's the night at 6 years old I shook the hand of Ted Bundy. I worked as a trucker for a year or so, and had some weird experiences. I'm probably late to this thread, but fuck it. One of the strangest things I saw was just off the Trans-Canada in BC. It was surprisingly dead on the road I was on, nobody going either direction, which was weird, even for a Wednesday in the wee hours of the morning. I found a corner and see a pillar of smoke. My initial thought is that explains the no traffic. I start to slow down since it's kind of a blind corner and see that there is only one car off the ditch, fire blazing. I pull off the road to see if anyone is injured and can't see anyone. On the other side of the clearing is, no joke, 4 or 5 black bears standing on their back legs. As I notice them, they all begin roaring just crazily, like I intruded some sort of party or something. I back away back into my truck and watch as they calm down and continue to watch the fire. What the fuck happened that morning I'll never know. Bears are weird. I have a lot of weird bear stories. Last winter I worked as a night route driver for a medical courier service. Basically I'd drive way out to rural clinics, pick up biological samples from the drop box, and then drive them back into town and ship them to a lab via the 24-hour Kinkos. My route was the same 4 nights a week, but on Thursday, the 5th night of my work week, I had one additional stop, a vet's office out in the middle of fucking nowhere. It added about an hour onto my run because of how far out it was. I seriously don't know how they stayed in business because I only passed like 2 houses on the way there. Anyway, it's around 1 a.m. and I'm heading out to my last stop, the vet's office out in VFE. I get there, park, leave my car running as always, go around to the side of the building, collect the sample, head back to the car, and freeze as I see something rifling through the front seats through the open driver's side window. I think I'm being robbed in the middle of nowhere. My phone is in the cup holder, and I'm about to shit my pants when this thing stops, looks over at me, and then hauls ass back into the woods at the side of the driveway. It had to have been a bear, but it ran on 2 feet. I know bears can walk bipedally, so I'm sure that's what it was, but some little part of me thinks I saw something else. After that, I always drove my car right up to the drop box, so I didn't even have to get out when I made that pickup. Fuck that. When I was 19, my best friend and I, he's a guy, I'm a girl, road tripping around the West Coast for a few weeks of the summer. When we hit Humboldt, we set up camp in a state park, then decided to cruise back to town to get some pizza and see if we could spot anyone who looked like they could sell us some bud. After dinner, finding no one and feeling like dorks, we started driving back in. On an exit ramp, spotted a woman with her thumb out. She was so nondescript it was impossible to get a read on her, somewhere between the ages of 25 to 35, straight brown hair, brown pants and a plain blue sweater. Possibly because we were bummed out that the afternoon was ending without any memorable pot-buying shenanigans, we picked her up. She said her name was Trish. She had these very hollow eyes. She spoke very quietly. She carried a small brown leather suitcase. She asked where we were going. We told her. We asked where she was headed. She said, "Oh, I think I'll get a ride into the park with you. I won't sleep in your tent or anything," she assured us. We had a 2-person tent and obviously didn't want a stranger in it with us. We couldn't offer that, it was awkward. We had leftover pizza in the backseat, told her to help herself. She ate it all, quickly and quietly, like she hadn't eaten all day. Get to the campsite. Awkward. She asks what time we're leaving in the morning. Tell her 10. She nods and says she will see us then. Turns and walks into the woods. Disappears. We go to bed. No idea where she is or if she is coming back. In the morning she appears minutes after we get up and start moving around, making oatmeal on the camp stove. She does not look as if she spent a sleepless night in the woods. She looks exactly the same, not a hair out of place, not a pine needle stuck to her sweater. She observes our oatmeal, then disappears again. She returns shortly with 2 hands full of blackberries. This is a crowded campsite, and the blackberry bushes are picked clean. My friend and I spent a good half hour foraging the day before and found 3 berries total. We put the berries in the oatmeal, we all eat. Pack up, get in the car. Ask where she wants us to drop her off. She tells us to take her back. Back to the very spot where we picked her up. It's not the direction we're going, but it's not far. She looks very sad. She thanks us, she gets out. We wish her well, she says something like I doubt it. There was something spooky about the whole thing. But more than that, it was just really sad. I had just merged into I-25 from US 36 in Denver, and even though the speed limit is 55 miles per hour, nobody drives that slow. Because of the amount of traffic that merges on at the next on-ramp, I usually moved over one more lane. I did this as usual, and a silver Pontiac Aztek had let me into the lane. I gave them a thank you wave, and just then the pickup in front of me hits his brakes hard, and so do I. The truck then swerved to the right just in time for me to see the cars in front of him stopped. I swerved to left while still braking without looking. I missed the car in that lane thankfully, but I looked in my mirror and saw the Pontiac Aztek had clipped one of the cars that was stopped. When it did, it spun and then went into the side of the same car. I called 911 and let them know of the accident, then got off the highway at 58th Avenue and came back around as a witness via the police. When I got back to the site, traffic was stopped and someone had already got out to check on people. I didn't see it right away because of where I parked, but when I got out off my truck there was a guy standing at the driver's side of the Aztek crying, and he had put his jacket over the driver's head. This person was killed from head trauma when their head hit the window. If only I had not been selfish about the traffic merging ahead, this person would have had more stopping room and more distance to react. BTW, not a truck driver, but you do drive around Denver and its surrounding areas all day for work. Driving through Virginia on second day of a 4-day road trip. I remarked to my family that it was odd, we hadn't seen another RV of our, dated, make so far this trip. 2 minutes later, one comes along going the other way. Then I said, we haven't seen any deer this trip. Go around a bend and there's about 6 of them grazing in a glade by the roadside. Okay. I'm on a roll now. Okay then, we haven't seen Santa Claus on this trip. It was July. 5 minutes later, there's a billboard with Santa touting the Christmas store. So I said, we haven't seen $1 million. End of lucky streak. Frown. I have another story. Also driving through Virginia on I-81. Different year, same long route. Before I continue, you need to know that in non-Reddit life I have an unusual name that's hard to spell. I was feeling very depressed about life in general and rather aggravated in specifics, needed a restroom stop, and there aren't many along that stretch. And my dear husband has an amazing ability to pull into the grodiest gas stations. True to form, the one he pulled into took the cake. No name brand gas, filthy dirty, but I was ready to take what I could get. I head into the restroom stall. Weirdly, it had only one graffiti on the wall, saying God loves looks at clouds. Spelled correctly. Nobody, except God, apparently, ever spells it correctly. Even some family members. I took a picture. And laughed the entire rest of the trip. That God is a funny one. None of these are trucking stories, but they do involve long commutes on country roads. My sis worked about an hour and a half away from my mom's, where she was temporarily staying, at this time, which was bad, because she has a bad habit of falling asleep in cars. So on nights that she worked really late, I made her promise to call me and I'd stay up and talk to her until she got home. One night, late, I'm on the phone with her and out of nowhere she starts screaming. She finally gets out some semblance of a sentence, telling me there was a girl covered in blood, crawling out of the ditch onto the road. She pulls the car back around, and jumps out of the car and runs to her, the phone falling out on the ground. I am still listening. I hear the girl start sobbing and telling her, oh God, not you, I need help, they're coming back for me. My sister, at this point, thinks the girl might have a mental issue because of how frantic and disconnected her thoughts are, and because while she keeps saying she needs help, she doesn't seem to think my sister could help her. In hindsight, I think the girl saw my 5'9", 100-pound sister with her high-pitched voice and thought that they could easily kill her too. From here, besides screaming and broken glass, I can only tell it from her side. She sees this truck pulling up and is about to wave them down when the girl goes crazy and starts clawing and pleading with my sis to run. The truck puts on its brights, and 2 very big men jump out of the car and start walking towards them, making clicking cat calling sounds, and my sister's blood turns to ice. She reaches over, grabs the girl, no way in hell she's leaving her, and in a whirlwind manages to force her into the car, and jump in herself before the men reach the car and start smashing her lights. She speeds off, clipping one of them, and is followed by this truck trying to run her off the road for about half an hour. They only pull away when she reaches a hospital. Inside, the girl was in a panic and wouldn't let my sister leave her with the doctors. She kept saying she was her best friend and repeating her name over and over. From the doctors, my sister learned that this girl was repeatedly raped and then tied up and drugged behind the truck. To add to the creepiness, once my sister got home, she looked at her name tag and remembered that she had left hers at home and had borrowed an ex-employee's tag, Stephanie. And yet, despite my sis saying she didn't recall ever not fearing for her life enough to get to formalities and exchange names, the girl had called her by her real name. I don't have a spooky story, but I did have a near-miss experience that almost made me crap myself. My dad is my co-driver and we were in Atlanta and it had rained a bit. Traffic is a bit congested but not as bad as Atlanta can get. But then everyone suddenly starts braking and a semi to my left and ahead of me starts jackknifing and his trailer goes sideways skidding along the road with the length of his truck blocking all 3 lanes. I brake like I've never braked before. The motherfucker manages to correct himself, I have no idea, and I managed to squeeze through the gap between his aft and the side of the road and avoid what could have easily been a horrible accident. He goes along like nothing happened. Then my dad, who had been sleeping, reamed me for not keeping enough of a distance to avoid needing to brake so hard, and thus waking him up, and didn't believe me when I told him the awesome scary thing I just managed to avoid. Once my friends and I were driving back from the nearest decent sized city to our crappy little hometown in rural Tennessee. Now I had an older car, but it was in fairly good shape. No real issues aside from some carburetor problems occasionally. There were probably 4 or 5 of us in the car. One of my friends had recently read some novel where a character says, "Well, Jesus, Buddha, and a bag of chips." Being wise-ass teenagers, we thought this was hilarious for some reason. We kept coming up with various combinations of blasphemous words in the same vein as the original. After a few minutes of this, suddenly all the lights in the car just cut off. Inside and outside. Nothing else was affected. Just the lights. Then just as suddenly they came back on. Obviously we chalked that up to chance. I had never had that happen in my car before, but it's not something that can't be reasonably explained. After a few minutes of nervous laughter, the blasphemy resumed. Again the lights shut off. Now I was worried. I thought something was really wrong with the car. My friends accused me of turning off the lights. I hadn't and convinced them of it. Again, the lights came back on. Now I'm an atheist currently, and at the time was a pretty cynical Christian. I didn't put much faith in the thought that our banter was pissing God off, so he was sending a message. But still, sometimes you don't tempt faith, right? Well, you aren't me then. Much to the dismay of my friends, I decided to give it one more try. I don't remember the exact phrase, but let's assume it wasn't something you'd say to your grandmother. No sooner had the last syllable rolled off my tongue than the lights cut off for good. This time long enough to force me to pull over and turn off the car. We all sat silently pondering what had just happened. One of my more religious friends said a little prayer in the backseat. I kept my cynical mouth shut this time. Eventually I started the car and the lights came on just like normal. We rode the rest of the way home in silence. I never had a problem with anything electrical in that car after that night. The battery even lasted a couple more years until I sold it. My friend and myself were on a road trip. Part of the road trip took us just north of San Francisco, and just south of the area where the Zodiac was supposed to live. For some reason our mapping program freaked out and took us on a long back roadway to our campsite. The road runs through the mountains and is 1.5 lanes wide, meaning that if there is another car coming at you on one of the tight curves, one of you will have to stop, reverse to a slightly wider point, and let the other car pass. Sure enough, we get to talking about the Zodiac. You know, college kids trying to freak each other out. This was a long time ago, but we'd be doing the same thing if it were today. On cue we run into another car. It doesn't turn its high beams off, blinding us. We kidded with each other that it was the Zodiac, blinding us so that he could take us out before we knew what was happening. I reverse to let the car pass. He drives by. It was just a harmless man with his kids in the back. But then I see a flash out of the corner of my eye. I look over at my friend to ask he saw it too, and he was open-mouthed and staring in the same direction. Today we have no idea if it was our minds playing tricks or not, but he got a much better look than I did. Both of us swear we saw a man running off through the forest wearing what? A dark blue jacket. FML. We both figured we were just seeing things, but neither of us ever fully gave it up to a creation of our mind. My girlfriend and I were to go on a backpacking trip in NorCal. She had work that afternoon until 5, so we didn't hit the back roads to the mountains off the highway until just before dark. The route we took was plenty familiar and went through a nice country area. This was our second trip to the same place, only the first time we came there happened to be during an OHV competition, so the place was really populated. This time it was not, and my girlfriend joked about this movie where a serial killer cleaned out a town and just kinda played shop after killing everyone. Of course, she then falls asleep, leaving me and our dog up alone. The whole drive through the town and then the farmlands went by without meeting a single person. When we finally started our descent of the unmaintained mountain access road, I get that nagging feeling that someone's there and you just can't see him, so I turn on the CB to hear any traffic nearby from campers or night trail drivers and get nothing. Now this truck is 22 years old and it has some issues now and then, but about 2 hours into the mountain, the pitch black in the cab gets interrupted by a bright orange check engine light which goes back off a minute later. It's now dark enough that I turn on the overhead high power lights to give myself some comfort as to our surroundings. Just then, the CB, which I forgot was on, squealed out the worst static ever and I jumped to turn it off. Looking back up, this big ass deer was standing in the road and I had to slam on the brakes, stalling the truck and bringing back the check engine light. Now it's dark, the truck's off, the check engine light is on and the damn dog starts whining. I try the key and the engine whines but no start. I sit there and wait a while and hallelujah, it worked. When we got to the trailhead, surprisingly we found around 10 cars parked, which is a hell of a lot more than comfort permits, especially so far out alone. And when I get out of the cab, I notice a group of around 8 sitting on an overlook. They turn to me and one of them says, "Glad you made it all right." I later realized that vantage point made it so someone was able to watch us the whole 3-hour drive up that mountain, all while I sat in that cab feeling so damn alone. Sure helps you remember there's always someone who's watching, even if you think you're alone. I'll go for one that we just couldn't explain. I was riding shotgun in a car with my ex and her sister on a stretch of road with only marshland/forest around in the pouring rain. I remember so clearly being asked if I liked an excess, and I said I didn't really listen to them but to go ahead because I always liked finding new music, so she put them on. I think we were driving really far to get to a mall or something. I can't really remember. Coming down a hill we saw a man walking towards us, kind of off to the passenger side of our lane, bawling his head off. He had a briefcase above his head to shield him and was dressed in a full nice suit. As we got closer I noticed that instead of a dress shirt he had an excess shirt tucked into his dress pants. He was older and not homeless. I got the impression of a rich man. We just drove by and nobody but me noticed the shirt, just commented on how weird it was. A guy was just in the middle of nowhere, but I thought that was fucking freaky. We didn't see any breakdowns or somewhere he could have come from for an hour in either direction. Also, he was dry. Thinking back to it, he wasn't wet. He would have been muddy all over out in that storm, but he was very much dry. I remember on a long road trip, 14 plus hours, with my dad to Colorado we saw a car barrel past us at like 100 something. Keep in mind it was about 9 o'clock and we still were hours behind schedule, and had a long way to go, with a short time to get there. Now it isn't odd to see bad speeders on the road, but since we were in the middle of nowhere, we had no idea where this guy came from. We continued driving for a few minutes, and saw another car speed past us, at about the same speed. Funny thing was, it looked like the same car. Same color, same model SUV. We shrugged it off as a coincidence and continued. About the same amount of time had passed, and we saw it again, passing us. That time, we were very sure it was the same car. This pattern continued twice more before my dad pulled off into a motel to spend the night and delay our trip. My dad is usually a very sensible person that's hard to scare, but I've never seen his face so ashen and afraid. He's never talked to me about the incident since, and doesn't allow me to drive after 9:30. Back when I was maybe 12 years old my parents had a beat-up Buick Century. The car had this tape/radio in it that was on the fritz and would inexplicably turn on off/skip around on the radio frequencies. Usually the only way to turn it off was to slap the top of the dashboard hard so it would cut back off. Anyhow, we are taking a ride back from Tampa to the east coast of Florida on a long shitty road in the middle of the night. One way each direction and not another car in sight. My mom doesn't like driving with the radio on, so we're just proceeding in silence as she tries to make small talk. Hey look, Thomas Acre, the odometer is flipping the last digits to 666, I glance over and yes it happens to be. Yeah, as if this road isn't spooky enough. All of a sudden the radio cracks on by itself and has loud static. She looks at me and I look at her kinda shocked, but we were used to it flipping out. Then just as we start to laugh it off, it scans to the Gator Classic Rock station, and is blasting fucking Highway to Hell. We both are like what the fuck? And start slamming on the damn dashboard but shit just won't turn off. And it was on fucking loud. I mess with the dial. Nothing. Just stuck listening to it and being thoroughly freaked out. At this point we are looking out the side windows and expecting things to only get worse when almost as soon as the odometer clicks over to XXX667 the radio cuts back off and there's silence again. Spookiest shit coincidence that ever happened to me lol. One night about 6 months ago I was driving my sister home and to get to her house I have to drive 15 miles highway and 6 miles back roads. It's 1 in the morning and I had just dropped her off when I'm at a stop sign waiting to turn out. I see the first set of headlights I had seen since leaving my house. I didn't think anything of it and got on the highway. This is where it got fucked up. There are no lights on this highway, just country, and the glow of headlights. The dude pulls up right beside me like he's going to pass but just drives alongside me. I speed up, he speeds up. I had finally had enough and rolled my window down and gave him the finger, but I'm shocked at what I see when I roll down my window to look over. It's a guy, all the lights on his old box van with his fucking eyes open so wide and his mouth open as wide as it can with all of his teeth showing, and he had an old Polaroid instant camera. He kept taking pictures of me because I literally couldn't get away. I finally slammed on my brakes and he kept driving. I got his license plate number and reported it, but the cops just chalked it up to kids playing pranks. Yeah, fucking right. The most disturbing thing that's ever happened to me was on a long drive back to college for my last semester before graduation. I am a night person and was leaving kind of late for the drive but was expecting to get in around midnight. Being that I would be living on my own after school, I was feeling a bit sentimental as it felt like I was leaving home for the last time. Home was somewhere else now. So it's sunset as I'm driving towards the highway and there's a beautiful low fog in the fields along the road catching the light. I decide around then that it'd be nice to try for a more scenic backroads route than the typical turnpike stuff, so I decide to cut off towards West Virginia. I stop at a diner, get gas, then proceed towards the WV line as night falls. This is the last human contact I make for the rest of the drive. I didn't foresee it, but an immense, dense fog dropped over Appalachia that night, slowing my drive considerably. At some points in the mountains there was scarcely 10 or 15 feet visibility. But there are some small towns the road leads me through. It's Friday night, though, and it begins to feel oddly dead in each town I pass through. It'd be 9 or 10 p.m. and the local bars would look closed. There were no lights on in any of the houses. I felt uneasy, but maybe that's just how it is there. Anyway, I'm making terribly slow progress with the fog and the backroads at night, deer sightings keeping my foot a little light when the fog wasn't too bad. But at some points I'd have to nose my way through foggy intersections, unsure if I'd find the other side. It was almost impassably dense at times, and the trip would take double the estimated time to arrive because of it. I'm often driving around 25 miles per hour or worse, trying to be safe, and it's around 1 or 2 a.m. and there is no cell phone service as I get into a large national forest. There's no other traffic around, there has been little all night, so I decide to pull over to pee, leaving the engine on for whatever reason. It'd be a quick stop. I'm not fearless by any means, but I try to not let myself get too jumpy in the woods at night. But as I'm coming around the car undoing my belt, I hear voices maybe 40 or 50 yards into the forest, and then they're scrambling through the dead leaves and brush coming in my direction. It's pitch black, night, no street lights or houses, national forest, cloudy, foggy, starless/moonless night, and I can't see anything off the road beyond the red glow of the tail lights. Feeling sufficiently freaked out, and not willing to find out more, I bolt back to the driver's side and floor it up the next hill, happy I had left the car on anyway. My heart is pounding. I never find out more about this little scare, and I'm glad for that. A little while longer and I'm heading up some steep mountains and nearing an old fire watchtower from the World War II days. There's a plaque, roughly, about it being a community morale builder to have built it even if it didn't affect the war in any way. I pulled into the overlook to actually pee because I never got the chance earlier. Now that I'm atop a sizable mountain, I suddenly get cell service and a string of concerned texts from my mom freaking out and asking if I made it okay. By this time I should have been at my house hours ago, but I took a long and unfamiliar way in the dark and intense mist. Knowing that she won't go to sleep until I'm there, she's like that, I respond that I'm safely home, hoping that we'll end it. She immediately calls me and asks where I am, and I can't really ignore her call, having just texted her. I tell her I'm home and she asks, in Virginia? And I say yeah, in my college town, despite being at the top of a mountain in a national forest in West Virginia. She sounds deeply unsettled and says she's been trying to call me repeatedly, while I had no service. I ask why, and she says she got a really weird phone call from West Virginia, but way west of where you should have been, which is where I actually was. She said she got this phone call and a gruff young man with a backwoods-sounding voice was telling her he needed to speak to my name, and swearing at her and saying all these nasty things. She said she heard people in the background screaming and people laughing. She hung up and called me a few times, but it went straight to voicemail. She typed the number in Google and saw it was from WV and knew I was at least passing through a small part of it and called the number back. A small child answered and swore at her, then the earlier voice ripped the phone back and started saying my name again and saying that he needed to speak to me. This is especially strange because I was driving my dad's car and am not registered to it, so even if they somewhere saw my plates and could run them, they'd get his name. I think I even paid with cash at the diner and gas station way back near the start of the drive 5+ hours earlier and in another state. I can't think of anything I could have dropped with my name on it when I had stepped out of the car briefly earlier during the recent incident. I still had all my cards in my head. It would be an incredibly strange coincidence or extremely elaborate scare prank either way. I do my best to reassure my mom I have no idea what that could be about and that it must be a weird coincidence. I tell her I'm at my house and okay despite how troubling I find all this in reality. She gives me a half-hearted okay and we say goodnight. I pull out of the Watchtower pull-off and continue on into Virginia. Never have I been so comforted by the 3 a.m. dregs of late-night parties, students stumbling home at a nearby university town off a highway I know well from my usual route. I carry on to that highway and make it safely, and things have been completely normal since, but I have never brought it up with my mom again, nor have I ever had the heart to tell her where I was driving that night, or how late, or of the voices in the woods. There's no climax and no resolution. I'm trying to forget.